Hi everyone, here's the Bookchemist once again, and as 2022 draws to a close, I decided to take a break from the pile of books that I'm going to read next and revisit a favorite of mine, which is Foucault's Pendulum by Umberto Eco. I'd been meaning to reread this before the end of the year, and I'm really happy I decided to do so. I finished it just yesterday, and I had as much of a great time with it as I did the first time around. I might film a review of Foucault's Pendulum. There actually is a review on my channel, but it's several years old and I would need to rewatch it, see if it still makes sense or if I'd rather refilm it to provide a bit more of an updated take on the book. But in the meanwhile, I decided, since I hadn't been posting in a while, I decided to ask some people on Patreon and on Twitter just to ask me some questions, just as a chance to have a bit of a conversation and really say hi before the end of the year, I guess. So these are just a few questions that people had about me and about the channel. Brian Robertson asks, I'm wondering if you'd ever want to do another read-along guide like you did for Gravity's Rainbow. This is actually a question I get asked all the time in the comments to my videos. People, at least some people, seem to really enjoy the read-along I did for Gravity's Rainbow. There's gonna be links to it in the description box to this video, and I enjoyed it a lot too. It was such a great way to reread the book, and it really heightened my appreciation of it, and it was so great to discuss the book every couple of weeks with you guys in the comments to those videos. I would really love to do something like that again. The only problem is that when I did that series, I actually had way more free time than I do at the moment, and I would only start a series like that if I were absolutely certain that I'm gonna be able to stick to my schedule, post a video every couple of weeks. So I would really need to think carefully about what type of book I might want to reread together with you guys, or even read for the first time, whether I might prefer to do a series like that by tackling maybe a few shorter books around a given topic or a given period in literary history, or a given country, who knows. I'm thinking about it, put it that way. I'd love to do something like that in 2023. We'll see. PC asked, do you have a favorite paragraph in literature? Failing that, a favorite form of potato? I don't know what you mean by form. I like Mary's Piper potatoes. As for paragraphs, I have many. The first that comes to mind are actually the final couple paragraphs in The Island of Dr. Moreau by H.G. Wells, when the narrator reflects on how his time on the island changed his view on mankind. I just think it's a beautiful, it's a way of turning the entire novel into a beautiful metaphor for isolation, for trauma, for certain types of nervous breakdowns. It just conveys a message that it's incredibly bleak, but manages somehow not to be self-commiserating. Some passages in Lovecraft carry a similar message. In general, that's just one of my favorite paragraphs. I tend to like endings a lot. I tend to appreciate endings more than beginnings, as a rule of thumb. Bada Bing asks, my question is, what made you specifically interested in American literature? What do you think we gain from studying another nationality or culture's literature? Do you think there is a wrong way to read another culture's work? Man, that's 3 questions, and 3 immense questions. I'll give it my best shot. I studied American literature because I was a huge fan of American culture as a teenager. I really liked American movies and TV series and American music, and that image of America that is conveyed through these things, through popular culture. Also, of course, maybe the lofty ideals on which the United States are founded, ideals of equality, a society where everybody can find their place and everybody can work together regardless of their ethnicity, regardless of their origins. Later in life, I obviously came to understand that those lofty ideals, as in all countries in this world, are sometimes very far from the reality of things, but I definitely had a strong fascination with the US as a teenager, which is what led me to study American literature. In fact, American literature was almost fundamental to my disillusionment. I remember that one of the things that struck me as most surprising when I started reading a lot of American literature, especially postmodern authors, is that popular culture in the US tends to be really really tends to endorse this idea of the US as, you know, a unique nation, privileged among all, a place of, you know, equality and wealth for all, whereas American literature very often is concerned with unpacking and deconstructing this very idea, this very image. As for what do we gain, I think we gain an immense insight into other people's culture, into their language, into the way we think. And the thing is, it's only by studying other cultures that we can really understand our own, in the same way as you cannot really understand yourself if not within society, because of your relations with others. In fact, now, don't quote me on this, and the historians out there might contradict me, but I'm fairly sure that traditionally, when it came to learning, what you would do as a scholar is you would study the classics, Greek and Latin. You might study foreign languages such as French if you were from continental Europe, but if anything, it's the idea of studying your own language and culture in isolation, this idea of studying English at university, that is much more of a recent and contemporary phenomenon. And if anything, I think it's that idea that deserves scrutiny, and not so much the idea of studying other cultures, which seems to me self-explanatorily valuable. Not that there's anything wrong with studying your own, with studying English, far from me to say that. Obviously there's incredible things to be gained there too. Sorry, that turned controversial. Is there a wrong way to read another culture's work? I'm sure there are countless wrong ways to read another culture's work. Just as with any type of scientific inquiry or discovery, you can commit so many mistakes along the way. The mistakes are part of the process, I guess. I guess that if you approach the study of a foreign culture with the right balance of courage, but also humility, you can't really go very wrong. So long as you understand that your perspective is inevitably an outsider perspective, you can't really go wrong. And the thing is, an outsider perspective, for that idea that I mentioned before, it is always going to be really valuable, because it's only outsiders who really can tell us things about ourselves that we wouldn't discover by ourselves. It's the same idea I have as when it comes to living abroad. I think it's one of the most valuable things you can do for your life, is spending a few months, however long you can, in a foreign country, even and especially if you intend to spend the rest of your lives in your own homeland. That time that you spend abroad, just as the time you spend studying a foreign language or a foreign culture, is really going to change and impact the way you look at your own roots and culture for the rest of your life. Ross Byrne asks, who are your current top 5 writers then? That's an easier question. Without spending too much time on it, thinking about it, H.P. Lovecraft, Michael Chabon, Jennifer Egan, Jonathan Lethem, and I'd say Thomas Pynchon. Umberto Eco would be the 6th writer, if I could name a 6th, but I guess this is the top 5. Minerva9 asks, what is the biggest disappointment of a novel from an author that you love? All the authors I love, all of the 6 authors I just mentioned, have written disappointing novels or short stories. I think it's part of the process, you can't win them all. But the most disappointing novel by an author I love has to be Utopia Avenue by David Mitchell. Such a truly bad book, in such a deep and comprehensive way, from an author who other of his works I really utterly loved, Number 9 Dream and Cloud Atlas for sure. I still remember them among my favorite novels from the last decade or so. Pavan asks, translation versus reading them in the original. If you can read them in the original, always read them in the original. I don't see why you wouldn't. It's that the way I look at translation is, if you have to, there's nothing wrong with it. If anything, by all means, read the book in translation, but why wouldn't you, if you could read it in the original? Sadly, I can only read 2 languages in the original, which are English and Italian. I'd really like to learn French and Spanish to a point where I can read them, but I realize that I've been saying this for many years and I still only did like 3 lessons in French on Duolingo so far, so who am I kidding? Vesens Mennesket asks, are you planning to read Viriconium by M. John Harrison? Tell you what, I actually have another one of Harrison's novels, which is, I think the title is The Sunken Land Begins to Rise Again, on my reading pile downstairs, and I'm probably gonna read it in the first months of next year. If I like that one, I'll definitely keep Viriconium in mind. Sunken Land, I came onto my radar because I read about it in a scholarly essay that compared it to H.P. Lovecraft's Shadow over Innsmouth and other sea-focused stories, and so I was immediately, I have to read this too. Nothing asks, what genre do you dislike or read relatively less? There's not really a genre that I dislike specifically. The fiction that I love tends to walk the line between different genres and include elements from various places. I'm thinking of maybe family sagas with monsters, or stories about failing relationships with a sea monster, or horror stories about sea monsters that are also an excuse to reflect on existentialist philosophy and the nature of reality. Monsters usually tend to play a part. In fact, the stories and novels that I tend to dislike are those that sit a little bit too squarely within one single genre. A novel of psychological insight that doesn't have at least a few monsters, or even just a bit of thrills to it, is probably gonna feel unreadable to me, in the same way as a horror story that is trying to achieve absolutely nothing other than scare me is also probably gonna bore me quite fast. Akshaik asks, favorite poets or poem collections? I actually filmed a video about this, and I'll put a link in the description box, but that video is ancient, so I'm probably very little in it is probably going to make sense. Favorite poet, probably still Wallace Stevens. I loved studying him in college, and I still have fun reading his poems, just appreciating the way he plays with language and just basking in their enigmas. Earthy Anecdote is it my favorite poem? It might be. Earthy Anecdote by Wallace Stevens might be my favorite poem. It's a very simple poem. Again, link in the description box. So these are just the answers to a few questions that you guys asked. I hope they gave you a little insight about, I don't know, the way I read or whatnot, but I also hope that they allowed you to think about the way you would answer these questions and the way you relate to the same topics. Is there a genre that really bugs you and you really dislike? Maybe there is. Let me know in the comments what you thought of these questions, and let me know if there's any other really pressing question that you'd like to ask. Thank you so much to my patrons for supporting the channel throughout 2022. I really appreciate it, and thank you all for watching my videos in the course of the year. I will be filming my top 20 books that I read in 2022 early next year. I always have fun looking back at the year in readings and picking my favorites. So yeah, that one's coming too. See you soon, and bye everybody.